And happy Sunday. This is PFG Live. Aren't you glad you showed up? Welcome aboard. We have a very vigorous crew in the chat rooms. Let's see. I don't have any confirmation from YouTubers that we're being YouTubed on video, but welcome on Discord. DBX, CJ Stevens, Widgetworks, OC John, Josh, Unix Carbide, Carl Talbert, Thomas Hardy, Warren Jones, and Evils. Welcome aboard. We have some weather reports flying in. Josh reports at CXMD, that's Charlie X-Ray Mike Delta. Automatic report, winds are 350 at 10, gusting 16. Temperature 14, dew point 02. Remarks, peak wind was 350 at 18 at 1640. Welcome aboard, sir. Let's see. We have Carl Tauber in the People's Republic of Rhode Island reporting 58 degrees Fahrenheit and threatening rain, which is never good. Here in the Windham, New Hampshire, it is 59 degrees, 50% relative humidity, winds out of the west-southwest at 12 miles an hour. Manchester Airport reporting winds 230, 17, gusting 27. That's pretty windy. Visibility 10 miles, broken clouds at 6,500, overcast 11,000. Temperature 14, dew point 09. Remarks, peak winds were 220 at 27. Pretty windy here in the New Hampshire. Let's see, who else do we have? Extra credit for Josh, including a picture of the airport. DBX is reporting at White Plains. Winds are 260 at 7, gusting 14. Visibility 10 miles, scattered at 11,000. Temperature 13, dew point 01. Remarks are unimportant. My gosh. DBX, did you know that White Plains has exactly standard pressure right now? 2 for the altimeter. Unbelievable. Warren Jones is here and is reporting in Sutton, New Hampshire, somewhere around 55 degrees, mostly cloudy and trying to rain. There is a barometer somewhere underneath the mess in my office. Remarks are snide and not worth repeating. I like that when you're self-aware. Evils is reporting a METAR of something. It's not raining inside his office. Robert Simpson reports 70 Fahrenheit, sunny near Detroit, 66 Fahrenheit in the shop. That's chilly. Unix says, aren't you glad he didn't say banana? Widgetworks is reporting 14 science and sunny with 3 chemtrails in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. We were just saying in the chat earlier that if you watched my 7-minute video sped up recap that I did during the eclipse, that we had numerous interesting chemtrails. Unix Carbide in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, New York City, New York State, in the United States of America. 68 degrees Fahrenheit, light rain bursts. 20.04 relative humidity in the micrometer drawer. Welcome. Let's see. And video is good. Thank you, Widgetworks. I guess we're good. Carl asks a question to start off, to lead off here. Do the ToolMakers flats need to be highly parallel in addition to being flat and ringable? So that's a super good question. The answer is, I wouldn't say highly, but yes, they need to be parallel. We're gonna call them plus or minus 50 millionths, which is not terribly hard to do for parallel, and they need to be wicked flat. So I wasn't going to start with the ToolMakers flats, but we might as well talk about it a little bit. I made a modification. I posted this to Instagram to the holder that I have made to go in the groove of the ToolMakers flat, specifically for use while lapping it. And the reason I made this was I realized that with the big circle, as I moved around, I couldn't see where the edge of the ToolMakers flat is. And if you don't know where the edge of the ToolMakers flat is, you can't control your traverse around the lap. So I made a different a different design so I could see past the holder, and that is it. So I can't wait to lap this thing. We're going to be talking about lapping today. Let's see. So welcome aboard, everyone. We were going for quite a while in the chat on the Discord server, having a good time. It was pretty funny. I think it's neat. You know, I just want to point out how cool a community we have. That we have Belgium, Canada, two widely dispersed places in Canada, Brooklyn, New York, which is its own country, upstate New York. Who else was in there? We have people everywhere. Tuck is here from Buffalo. We have a lot of New York, but we're all, you know, able to sit around and shoot the stuff. So it's pretty neat. Interesting week. We are recovering. Widgetworks says we are all super nerds. That is true. That's what brings us together. We're recovering from the Eclipse, and I jokingly put in the title, you know, what's all this fuss about ellipses? Which is funny because I got called out on a recent Instagram post where I showed a 3D print, and on the walls of this thing, which I haven't really told anybody what it's for, I put in diamond shaped cutouts to save material and save time. And I got yelled at because it was not the standard ellipses that I use. Let's see if I have a picture of this. I do not have a picture of this, but I have this ellipse motif going on in the PFG Stones trays. And that's sort of my thing, is I use ellipses to make these holes. And he saw these holes and they were diamond shaped. And all of a sudden I was getting dinged because they weren't ellipses. I'm sorry, but we all have ellipses on our minds. Yes, it was the style guide violation that I got nailed on. I don't know what to say. Also, talking about style, many of you have not asked me the type font that I use, and I have been using pretty regularly. In fact, on your screen in the upper left corner and the lower right corner, you'll see the same thing. But this is called Bryant Bold. Bryant Bold. And that's become our adopted type font. And I know DBX cares deeply about that. And we have talked about that at length. So we made it through an eclipse, complete with pretty decent weather in the Northeast, especially the extreme Northeast, but pretty crummy weather down in Texas. So the southwest part of the eclipse track didn't have the best weather, but we had some good weather here. And then my buddy, who went to Jackman, Maine, had fantastic weather and got some fantastic photos. And my kiddo, Jared, went to Burlington, Vermont with a school trip and got this fantastic photo, which looks better when you see it in higher resolution, but it was gorgeous. And he said it was a fantastic experience. So that was at totality. Let's see. Flat Lapper is showing up. He says, howdy, 76 and sunny and 12 miles an hour in North Illinois. Let's see. He's late. He had to pick up creamer. You were out. I'm sorry. Did you look in the second refrigerator down in the shop? Been meaning to check that. Harder than HRC 65. What's hard? Oh, the little bases. So we've been talking about flats and bases and things, and grinding things flat and scraping things flat and testing things. There it is. Little Mitutoyo anvil. What do we call that? A micrometer anvil. And I challenged him to test it, and he says harder than 65. Not a big surprise. That's pretty awesome. So other interesting things that happened during the eclipse. I did not set up for photography. My buddy who went up to Jackman, Steve, he did set up for photography, and he got some phenomenal shots. He has not yet published, so I don't have anything to show you. Sitting outside was lovely. I was sitting with my wife, and we were enjoying a pair of binoculars that I set up with solar filters. The binoculars, for us, the binoculars were the best viewing. And the solar filter, which is what I made, consisted of 2 layers of thermal blanket material. So this is aluminized mylar. You've seen it, the shiny stuff. And you could buy thermal blankets in little packets. And I had purchased some of these for another application having to do with antennas. And I cut out 2 layers, but this was by experiment, and put them on the main objective lenses of the binoculars with rubber bands. Not any old rubber bands. These were broccoli bands. So that worked out spectacularly well. In fact, that was the thumbnail shot on my 7-minute video that I put up on YouTube. But I didn't have any like spectacular photography of the eclipse. What I did is I took data. I took data on the output of our solar electric array leading up to and on the other side of the eclipse. So here's let me show you a photo. Okay. So up on your screen, I apologize for the audio only listeners, but I'll explain to you what we're looking at. This is an output on a very clear day. It actually was I think the day after the eclipse. This is a very clear day and output of my solar array. On the right side, it looks like a bell curve. It looks almost exactly like a bell curve. On the right side of the bell curve, it looks a little jaggedy. I think those were high wispy clouds that were coming in. But that's the basic shape. And what I was interested in seeing is what happens during the eclipse. Well, here is the same graph, except on the day of the eclipse. And it's perfect. See that big notch on the right? That big notch is the eclipse. And it was just fantastic. I've been through several eclipses. This, of course, was the most occluded one. We were in 95% zone here at my house. My son, who took that great picture, went up to Burlington, Vermont, and Burlington was in totality, 100%. So the feeling I got when we hit the time of maximum eclipse was that it's that feeling like, oh, I left my sunglasses on. So you go to take your sunglasses off, but you're not wearing sunglasses because the sun's there. Your brain is processing this, saying everything looks a little dark, but the sun's there. I must be wearing sunglasses. And you find yourself reaching for your sunglasses. And it's like, no, it's not sunglasses. It's an eclipse. So that was a fun shot. Pretty spectacular. The other thing, my favorite photo, well, let me just show you my first image during the eclipse, which of course was not a photograph. I did a pinhole camera, and the pinhole camera consisted of a box that I had in the shop, a piece of aluminum foil taped to the top over one of the holes, and a little pinhole in it. Yeah, Chop Smitty says, little late, tune into astronomy. That's right. If you were even later, it would be even scarier. So that was the first image, was pretty close to maximum, was a pinhole image. And but my favorite one was this one, where we were using number 12 welding filters, 4x5-inch glass filters, which I generally don't use welding. I tend to go to number 10s roughly. But you hold it up and there it is. You were staring at the shape. You didn't have anything in front of your face, and that was my favorite shot. And it was a fun day sitting outside and just enjoying the weather. So I know a bunch of friends had a good time during the eclipse. I'm glad I changed my mind about driving to Vermont because I was about to drive to Vermont. In fact, DBX, not DBX, I'm sorry, Unix Carbide hooked me up with a buddy of his up in Vermont, and his buddy said, yeah, I got a place for you to park. You can park the truck. And I almost made the trip, and I located some other areas I could have gone to. And then right at the last minute, I said, let me check what the internet has to say about these areas of Vermont. And I got plenty of indication that the entire greater Boston area was going to these areas of Vermont. And I decided not to go, which was a good thing because Jared got on a big coach bus at the high school early in the morning, and he got home at 2 a.m. when I picked him up at the high school. The traffic was insane. But he had a good time. I had a good time. Everybody seems to have had a good time. And that was the eclipse. And no, I did not detect any change in my gauge blocks due to the eclipse. So if this is your first time here tuning into the PFG Live and you're wondering, what the heck is this? Generally, this is a group of machinists, tool makers, precision nerds, engineers, non-engineers, people who get stuff done, some people who don't get anything done. But we're all about precision. And that's why we're here. So, once again, my joke was about Ellipse and not Eclipse. So an ellipse, I don't know if you know this, but an ellipse is a circle is a special case of an ellipse. An ellipse has two focal points. Okay. So let's do a thought experiment, which is really useful if you're listening to the audio podcast. Let's take a piece of plywood and let's jam two nails into the plywood. Just imagine that those two nails are 6 inches apart. Now we're going to tie a string around into a circle, and we're going to put that string over those two nails, and we're going to take a pencil inside that string, and now we're going to traverse around the two nails as far as the string will allow us to get. And you're going to draw a shape, and that shape will be an ellipse. And those two nails are the two, is it foci or foci? The two focal points of the ellipse. Now, as you bring those two nails closer to each other in the limit, when those two nails are actually in the same place, it becomes a circle. And that's why a circle is a special case of an ellipse. And I started using the ellipse as I got to make a hole here to get rid of, stuff in a 3D print, like long ago, like when I first started 3D printing, and it has a lot of fine properties to it. Not the least of which, it's smooth and it doesn't have corners. So that's the story of ellipses, ellipsoids. Let's see. We had some interesting stuff go on this week. And besides the eclipse, which ate up, a chunk of time preparing, a chunk of time watching, and then because everything ended for me at 2 a.m, it kind of killed the next day. But I'm fixing to get ready to lap, and the ToolMakers Flat needs its surfaces lapped. So far, the ToolMakers Flat prototype P1, which we'll talk about, has been ground. So it's been the thermal treatments were very specific, and you think they were complicated. They weren't that complicated, and they've been ground. The grind came out really nice, and I was not intending to Um, I was not intending to make a fantastic grind because I knew we were going into lapping. But the grind came out really pretty nice. It tested for surface roughness at around 11, an RA in micro inches of 11 micro inches, which is not a super great grind, but it's a very good grind. But the parallelism, Carl, came in at roughly 25 millionths, and that was great. I was very happy with that. So those results are looking good. So now we're getting ready to lap. If you looked at the thumbnail for the video, you'll see my lapping station coming together. And let's see if I can get you caught up on what the lapping station is. Yeah, Carl, this is what we do. So that's 1/4 of a tenth, basically. And that's an approximation. I didn't get out the super good instrument to make that measurement. This was looking at a 50 millionths resolution test indicator, and roughly getting half of an indicator, half of a tick, half of a 50 millionths tick on parallelism. I then, and again, I wasn't trying super duper uber pooper hard, but it also tells you that my chuck is probably not horrible, and it tends to survive the way I use it. So I've had this vision for a lapping station for a while. When you lap, you use a cast iron lap. This is in my instance of lapping. I'm not making a generalization. So it's a cast iron lap, and you use another cast iron lap as the conditioning lap. So the conditioning lap goes on top. You condition the working lap with your abrasive slurry. And the abrasive slurry in my case is diamond. I buy it from High Pres, and I buy it through McMaster-Carr. What a shocker. And those two laps become complementary, right? Whatever curvature is on the working lap, the opposite curvature is on the conditioning lap. And if you would like a comfortable fantasy, you could imagine that they're both very, very flat. They are not. So you keep these things together they're mated for life. These laps are mated for life. So I came up with the idea of using a lunch tray to keep everything together for a particular grit. In my case, we're starting at 3 micron diamond. And then a piece of 1/4 inch thick acrylic sheet that's been cut so that it has 2 big holes for the laps, essentially to keep them all together and keep them in one place. Tom Lipton has been doing lapping a while, and he's been... Don't you need a third lap to ensure that everyone's flat? Okay, really good question. The lunch tray thing. Yeah, lunch trays are awesome, okay? And this last batch of lunch trays is red. So the lapping station is getting red lunch trays. The shop is full of black lunch trays. Let's see. So there's the final configuration. So we have a lunch tray. We have a piece of, so Tom Lipton cut a piece of plastic. In fact, I watched him evolve to this. So yeah, I got the idea of keeping the lap from sliding around the table from Tom. He took a piece of plastic and he went to the bandsaw and he cut himself out a circle, and then he clamped the plastic to the table. I think later he added the tray, not sure, but absolutely true. the initial seed for this came from Tom. So in the video, you can see the picture. The acrylic was cut out by laser at my makerspace. I have a CO2 laser, 120 watt with a big bed. Hey, K-Bonk is here. K-Bonk, welcome aboard. He says it's 74 in Philadelphia. Welcome, sir. The feature that I've added are 2 holes that go clear through the acrylic, clear through the lunch tray, which, yes, I know it's no longer watertight, and into the table below. So the table below is providing 2 inserts. Let me see if I have a picture of the inserts. I may not. Yeah, I don't think I do. But there's two inserts and 2 1/4-20 thumb screws lock the sandwich of the acrylic sheet in the lunch tray to the table, so now it's not moving. Hugh Mack says, by the way, welcome, Hugh Mack. I think you're a first timer. He says you have some hard points in that granite. So it's not granite. This is actually a cheap, what do they call that stuff? Formica, or, laminate cover on a cheap countertop. This is the countertop that was the island in the kitchen in the house that I'm sitting in. When we bought the house and we redid the kitchen, all of those kitchen bits went downstairs into the basement. So I'm in the basement. And then I went to, I bought these threaded inserts. It's funny because, what's his new channel name? 3D printer guy. Something layers, structured layers. Anyway, he was testing, threaded inserts in 3D printed parts. Well, I bought wood threaded inserts for 1/4-20, and I drilled 2 holes in the countertop and set them in. And I plan on doing another station just to the left of it. I'm not sure why, but I'm going to do that. It's easy. So this keeps everything from sliding around and moving around, and that was great. And I was staring at, yeah, Widgetworks says, dial 999 Home Depot. McMaster part number on the kitchen laminate, we'll get that for you. That'll be 9999T10746. You could just put that on your order. You'll be all set. Made with layers. Yeah, that's it. Made with layers. Thomas Sandlander. So he just did a whole thing on inserts for 3D printed parts, which I thought was great. And in fact, one of the ones he showed was the ones I bought, except I'm actually using them the way they're designed. So this setup worked fantastically well. And let me see if I can show you some more of these pictures. Let's see. Yes. So, well, let me just show you. I ended up with these acrylic rounds that were the cutouts from the center of the circle. And one of the things I wanted to do was to make a cover to go over the laps, so that when I put them away in their trays in the little baker's rack, they didn't have dust and stuff accumulating on them. So the first thing that popped into my head, of course, was, I'll 3D print little covers, and they'll pop right on. Not unlike, hang on. This is a 6-inch flat mirror that I have kicking around for various reasons. And, I printed a cover for it, and which is not the subject of today's discussion, but that's kind of where I was heading. And then I realized, no, I have these leftover pieces of acrylic that I cut out in order to make the cavities for the laps to sit in. I'm going to use these. So I went ahead and I designed some 3D printed rings, which have a lip in them to capture the acrylic. So the acrylic leftover that was otherwise going to be tossed into a pile somewhere drops into the top of this, a little bit of cyanoacrylate glue, and voila, you have see if I can show you this to you. So there's coming off the printer. Funny story. These rings come out of the 3D printing, the 3D printer, and after they were cooled off, they were not attached to the bed. I mean, literally, when my finger touched the ring, it was not attached. So we 3D printed these rings, and now that little lip in there is enough to capture the acrylic for gluing. And then this whole thing, I'll show you pictures, sits nicely over the lap. Here, this is a picture of gluing up the acrylic into the 3D printed rings with a thickened cyanoacrylate. And there it is. And it worked. It worked fantastically well. And the added benefit is that when the cover is on top of the lap, you can look at the lap through the acrylic. So no waste. That was the best part about the whole thing, is that everything gets used, even the oink. And then of course I label it so that it has there's no doubt as to which laps you're using. And then when you're done using the laps, you put the covers on them, you take the 2 thumb screws out, you take your tray, off it goes, and it goes into storage. And that is the story. Let's see. Hugh Mack says, you can admire the laps even as they rest in protected in storage. Yeah, it's pretty neat. And if you haven't seen my laps before, which, it's kind of personal, I don't show it to everybody. There they are. I did a video. I did an extremely popular video called Preparing for Precision Hand Lapping, in which I make these laps. I use these laps, and we end up lapping 1-inch hardened A2 pucks, and then show that they ring. And I have those downstairs, and that works out great. So the plan next is to go ahead and lap the 3-inch ToolMakers Flat. So there's 2 videos up so far, part 1 and part 2, on making the ToolMakers Flat. And part 3 will be lapping it. And I'm very much looking forward to it. So let's see, what else can I tell you about that project? It was kind of a quickie. Getting the lapping station up and running was kind of a quickie, because I didn't have a lot of time to spend on projects this week. But I'm very, very pleased with how it's coming out. Also, the station, where it is in the basement, I have a very nice 4-foot LED light right over it, so there's good light. My monochromatic light source will come downstairs to be next to it to close the feedback loop. Yeah, and we should be good. So everything you need, a sink, a place to wash, a monochromatic light source, the lapping plates, and of course the storage for all of them, are all going to be within 8 feet of each other. So that's going to be very, very efficient. I know Robin's here. Welcome, Robin. Robin's saying, 8 feet? You're wasting space. I know. So we'll keep you guys posted. Hugh Mack says, those are the ones you did all the heat treating with, along with the liquid nitrogen. Exactly correct. No, not the laps. This part that I'm holding in my hands right here, this is the part that you saw in the videos getting heat treated. The laps, which I guess I owe you an explanation. The laps are cast iron. So I went to McMaster Carr and I bought 6-inch by, I can't remember now, 1.25 inches, I think, thick, ductile iron, cast iron laps. And in the video that I referred to before, I turned them on the lathe to clean them up. And then we proceeded to, we clean the outside edges, we clean the faces on the lathe, we go to the grinder, we grind the faces, and then we start lapping them to each other, and then we were golden. So that's cast iron. This is 52-100 steel. Okay, the exact same steel that I shouldn't say exact. The same steel that is used in gauge blocks, and all of that heat treating that you were watching on YouTube is the same heat treating within limits that you would give to gauge blocks. That's why it was so complicated, because I was matching that. You can argue that for a ToolMakers flat, it doesn't have to be that crazy, but I have my reasons. I actually have a client that wants me to do some work for them in the lapping part. So I wanted to get to the material state that they had, and that's what this was all about. Okay, so there you go. So I'm pretty excited about the lapping station. It's nice, it's compact, everything you need is there, and we'll be ready to get that going. And we were talking in the chat. Unix Carbide is buying some of these cast bases that he found for scraping practice, and I offered to do some, to grind them flat, lap them flat. He's like, no, I want to scrape these things. Yeah, 52-100 steel is the same material as gauge blocks. It's the original material that Johansson used, and they kept it the same all these years. 52-100 is a ball bearing steel. It's high chromium. It's got a 1.5% chromium in it. I could tell you that cutting it was, you knew you were cutting something that was high in chromium. It was pretty interesting. It was tough, very tough material. But it heat treated beautifully, it ground beautifully, and I can't wait to lap it. It's going to come out great. So stand by. We will get to that. So we had some fun on the in the Discord. We have a lot of fun in the Discord server. By the way, if you're interested in joining the Discord server, you can go to the links page, look in the description of the video, and there is a link there for joining the Discord. Unix Carbide says, after I screw them up practicing scraping, I'll shout, I'm always here for you, buddy. We can make it better. We can always remove material. Yeah, thank you, Evils. Yeah, before I jump to, you're absolutely right. Let me cover this. In a recent podcast, John Saunders referred to another recent podcast by me and Tom Lipton, who was a guest here on the PFG.Live, in which Tom told a story about a guy who heat treated some A2 and ground it for use as a gauge, as a reference, and it came out too small, and he was bummed about that. This is not Tom, but the person that Tom knows, and he threw it in a drawer. And after 40 years, he pulled it out and measured it, and it had grown, back into specification, and he was happy again. So I wanted to explain a little bit, possibly with some errors thrown in for those of you who like to catch me making errors, about what was going on there. Because there was a statement made. I'm looking at you, John. Oh, I could say John because John is standing there with John. They're currently visiting. I'm referring, of course, to John Saunders and John Grimsmo, and the podcast they do together, The Business of Machining. You should listen to it. So the thought was that, A2 grows after heat treating. Not an accurate statement, and actually it's a bit misleading. So allow me to wave my fist in the air. This is the super short version of it. When you heat treat steel, in its annealed state, it's called ferrite, which is interesting because in my world, in the RF world, we have something we call ferrite, which is a very specific thing, which is different. But anyway, the steel crystals, and Carl, you could throw a shoe at me if I get this wrong, okay? The crystal structure of the steel in its annealed state is called a ferrite. We want to harden that steel, okay? We want to take that 52-100 and we want to turn that into something that's got a hardness of Rockwell C65. So we throw it into the oven and we start heating it up to a temperature which is on the order of 1,550 degrees Fahrenheit. Yeah, I'm not getting evils. This is not a lesson in material science. I'm going to make mistakes. So we're just going to run with it. As the steel comes up to those temperatures and becomes what we generically and imprecisely call red hot, the crystal structure goes to austenite, and which is also not exactly correct. And then we quench it. If we didn't quench it, if we let it austenite, if we didn't quench it and we let it just cool slowly, it would be austenite. If we quench it, it becomes martensite. AM radio. That's right. Austenite to martensite. AM. Remember that. Thank you, which works. We were talking about that earlier. So and then it becomes hard. Okay? So in the crystal structure called martensite, it is the hard thing that you wanted to make, and that's why you did your heat treating. And then you go ahead and you temper it, but I don't want to talk about tempering right now. So there are two basic crystal structures: body-centered cubic and face-centered cubic. So it has to do with how the molecules connect to each other to make the crystals. Martensite, the hard one, Austin and Martin, you can't do that to me, Unix. I know the difference. It's an Austin Martin. That's Rowan and Martin you're thinking of. I'm old enough to know better. So the crystal structure that is austenite is big, and the crystal structure that is martensite is small. So, I'm sorry, it's the other way around. Austenite is small and martensite is big. That's it. Austenite is small, martensite is big. So when you quench it, you take it up to the high temperatures and you thrust it into a quench. And so Carl says, isn't martensite less dense than austenite? It causes the katana to curve. You got your curve backwards, sir, because the way you use the sword, the curve, the convex part of the curve is the hard part, and the concave part is the tough part. So the hard is martensite, the tough is austenite. So it's the other way around. What happens is you quench the steel and you get a certain percentage of the crystal structure converting to the desired martensite, and you have a percentage that did not convert, and it's undesirable that it didn't, and that's austenite. And what happens is you get a certain hardness, okay, and over time the conversion continues, and it slowly converts and it grows. And you don't want it to grow. So what do you want? You want to minimize what they call, the metal guys call RA, retained austenite. Retained austenite is bad. So you try to get your process to get as much conversion as possible. So that's what happened in the story. It's very hard to make a pun. It's very hard to get that process to get very, very good conversion, near 100% conversion, and have it be stable. So the purpose of the cryo is to continue the conversion, is to continue the quench, and make a very small percentage of unconverted austenite or retained austenite. That's why you go through all that trouble. If you do not use the cryo, as Mr. Laren Thomas has shown in his book, and provides plenty of scientific references for same, if you don't cryo and you just quench to room temperature, you're not going to convert. And that's why you cryo. Also, you cryo as part of the quench. So you get from this 1550 Fahrenheit, you quench quickly down to on the order of room temperature, but the clock is still running, except the clock is running a little slower now. Now you go over to cryo and you keep going all the way down, and now you continue your conversion. So there's a couple of things that can happen. Number one, you don't cryo soon enough. You quench, and then you leave it for a while, and then you cryo later. Not as efficient. And the cryo, the colder the cryo, the less that matters. So it turns out that if you get it into cryo, and your cryo is liquid nitrogen, and you do it within an hour, you're fine. You're going to get in the 90s of conversion, 90% of conversion. But if you plan on doing a, for example, dry ice cryo, and you wait an hour, you've blown it, because some of the retained austenite is not going to convert. And if you don't do cryo at all, you don't get, you get it's 70 or 80% conversion, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, this is why we do all these crazy things. So going back to the story was because there was retained austenite, and over time it will convert. Just like in another metallurgy where cast iron is made for machines, like, for example, your favorite Bridgeport, right? Back in the day, they would take Bridgeport castings and they would throw them out behind the factory to go through 3 winters, okay, in order for the metallurgy to settle and become stable. All we're doing with a good heat treating process is trying to get that conversion as close to 100% as possible. Okay. So the story about the A2 growing has less to do with it being A2 than it wasn't heat treated appropriately for a gauge. Okay. Okay. I'm looking at the comments, making sure we covered everything. Yeah. So that's the story. That's the correction. That's the gentle correction to John on that story from Tom on our podcast. That's why it happened. All right. Did we do it, Evils? Did we cover it? I think we covered it. Thank you for reminding me. I wanted to talk about that today. Okay. So we've been talking about P1. And I made a statement a while back that your first prototype, that I number my prototypes as P1, P2, P3. And then when I have something that's released, it gets R1, R2, R3, which you could think of as release, or you could think of it as revision. That's fine. But if it hasn't been released, it's still a prototype. And my statement was that P1 has a lifetime of 15 minutes. And it's true. You'll make, we have 3D printers. We whip out prototypes on 3D printers. We go downstairs. We make a prototype manually on the lathe or whatever. But that first prototype, you get it, you put it in your hands, and you look at it, and you say, "Oh." And now you go make changes to your CAD, and you repeat the process to get P2. P1 lasts 15 minutes on average. So when I was making the rings for the ToolMakers Flat, for the handling of the ToolMakers Flat, here's P1. And when I made it and tried it, I realized, oh, you bozo, that's not going to work. So I made P2. And by the way, that was literally 15 minutes. Here's P2. All right, I made P2. And then I realized, oh, you made an error. I won't dwell on what the error was. And then finally, here's P3. And P3 worked, except I figured out, oh, you can't see the edge of the part that you're lapping. So off we went to P4. So and DBX designed this magnificent logo for P1, which is on your screen. He is an awesome graphics designer. And you may hear us talking in jest or in deep seriousness about P1. And if somebody makes something, throws it in the trash, we're going to say, yeah, P1. That's what you're supposed to do. But the more I thought about it, I was getting pretty philosophical about it, is P1 there's a lot of wisdom in P1. First of all, it's a prototype. And that's an important thing to remember, is that you're making a prototype. Prototype means the first type, the first incarnation of a thing is the prototype. It's the model that the next one's based on. So it's like it acknowledges that it's the beginning and something's going to replace it. Prototype means it's the beginning and something's going to replace it. I think in almost everything we do, we have to acknowledge that the next time it's going to be done a little differently and hopefully a little better. The fact that there's a digit after the P and it's P1 means that you acknowledge that it's the first one and you did something. So how many people do we hear talking about projects or doing things or how things should be done? That's my favorite. But they don't do anything. You don't get the P1 without actually doing something, without chips hitting the floor, without stuff getting thrown into you do not get to P1 without actually getting off your ass and making something. So it is an honor to call something P1, even though it's only going to last, on average, how long? 15 minutes. I don't know which scares me. Oh yeah, Robin, that's an interesting point. I don't know which scares me more, Widget Works, the fact that you said that or the fact that I actually was thinking it and decided not to say that. Widget Works says, is calling your kids P1, P2, etc. wrong? Yes, it is. Don't do it. So P1 has a short lifetime, but if you didn't make P1, you never get to the finish line. So you can't fall in love with the first prototype, even though P1 of the Toolmakers Flat seems to be holding up. Like, there's things wrong with this. We found things wrong with this. Okay, see previous discussions. I won't rehash it. And we learn from it. It's still useful, and we move on. But this is still P1. Do you think P2 is going to be better? I think P2 is going to be better. I've already identified several changes to make to the process when we make Toolmakers Flat TMF-3 P2. So that's coming. So don't be afraid to throw stuff out in the first 15 minutes. You should just pat yourself on the back and say, it's P1. Okay. I hope P2 lasts longer. Flatlapper says, I always keep rev numbers as a reminder. No preface letters. Fair enough. So Evil's found a reference to an F1 hybrid. It's used in genetics. Excellent. And WidgetWorks says sometimes you end up back at P1. Well, if you make a significant enough change to the design and you have to make another thing, it's new. So it gets another. It's also called P1. I don't have it handy. I got a nice gift from DBX, and he stamped it P1, which I value so much. So that's the story of P1. So if you ever hear us talking about P1, that's why. And don't be afraid to toss P1 into the trash. That's what it's for. It's there to get you to P2. Unix Carbide says, my P2s are typically worse than P1s. You need help. It's okay, because you can't draw a vector through a point. You can't draw a vector through a point. So if you make P1 and you say, oh, I know what to do, and you make P2, that arrow is now pointing either in the improving direction or in the getting worse direction. Either way, you know where you are. Isn't that awesome? But if you don't make P1, you don't get to P2. If you don't get to P2, you don't have a vector pointing in the direction you're heading. And if the direction you're heading is to a cliff, you should stop. Flatlapper says, date, part number, and continuous rev starting at 0.0. Fair enough. Unix Carbide says, but P3 gets it. Right. But P3, you couldn't find P3 without the compass, which is P1 followed by P2. But P1 is getting off the couch. P1 is starting. P1 is making a thing and not just talking about it. P1 is life. Doink, doink. There you go. Unix says, fun thing is finding out by R5 that it's been done decades ago. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, exactly. Evil's got it. He says, knowing P2 is completely the wrong direction is exactly as valuable as being on the right track. You are on the right track. You just have to grab the shift knob and go from forward to reverse and go the other way on that track. That's beautiful. Josh, hang in here. You'll be able to use the washroom in a minute. Robin says you can do P1, P2, P3 mentally in many instances. Yeah, exactly. You could do a thought experiment. Should we call that T1? I don't know. You could do a thought experiment and wake up on a Thursday morning after thinking about it all week and realize, yeah, that was terrible. That's that's the wrong way to go. Yeah, absolutely true. Oh, yeah. CJ Stevens says he's not on YouTube today, but please let them know that they need to like and subscribe. I'll take this opportunity to say that this video is brought to you by PFG Stones, who remind you to get flat and stay flat. Your likes and your subscription to this YouTube channel are greatly appreciated and hopefully fun. Widgetwork says P1 is on paper for me most of the time. No, there will be no sponsorships. Thank you very much. I'm going to argue against something that you're alluding to. And you too, Robin. I'm going to butt heads with you. P1, to earn this badge, where is it? To earn this badge, okay, you have to hold it in your hands. That sounded wrong. To earn this badge, you have to make a prototype. So a mental, I accept the idea that we do these mental thought experiments and we realize, yeah, that's not the right thing. It doesn't earn the P1 badge. I think you got to make it. All right. That's Robin has requested to speak. Stand by. You gonna give us video? Or you just want to talk? Hang on. If you're just gonna talk, I'll turn off video. Whoop, nope. You're getting ahead of me here, folks. We're doing it live here. Just audio, video. Push the button. Turn that off. I gotta click one more thing. Robin, you're live. Welcome.
I would argue that good morning, afternoon, whatever it is.
What I don't know what it is.
I would argue that most of the time, I think people cut material too soon, thinking about a project. One example that I think a lot of people will relate to and say, yes, you sketch something and you spend hours and hours refining it sketch-wise, because you can do a lot. You can just don't resist going out and cutting metal. Refine, think about it, do an analysis, say, okay, what's good about this? What's bad about it? You can beat it up, do a design review on your own, get help with a design review, get somebody else to look at it and say, what about this? Oh, yeah, that's no good. And then you get it all done. But then you go and say, okay, now this was just a sketch. Now I need to go and actually put it in CAD to get the actual dimensions.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden you go in CAD and you say, oh my God, that doesn't work. It does on paper, but there's things like, there's no room for that.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't going to fit here. So there's a case of P1 and you do some hard work on it, but then you go to the next step, P2, and there you refine that. And then even then you can wait to look at that design and then say, okay, let's think manufacturability now. Let's look for all the things that could make this easier to produce. So with discipline, you can go through a lot of versions. If you do, I mean, obviously people like myself and others who design things for a living, you start to get a whole routine of how to approach this. It doesn't mean you get it right all the time, but you have a sequence of events. And if there's no timeline pressure, you can put a lot of mental effort into a thing. And that's where I say, if you're not in a job shop where you have limited time, there's no reason for mistakes. You can think with enough experience, you can think ahead, think through the machining processes in detail, say, oh my God, if I go this route, how am I going to hold it now? If I back up 3 steps, do this later and leave a tab here or whatever, all those kind of, mental gyrations can save a lot of time. I agree with you. You can think about things too long and there's a point to say, okay, let's make it. But a lot of projects die because of the failure of the first item, because there wasn't enough thought involved. So I'm only disagreeing with you to a point.
Well, this is why we have arguments. This is entertainment.
This is the discussion.
So, yeah. So your point is that you could have P1 and never cut metal or whatever material you're working in, And I was waving my fist in the air and saying, no, P1 is when you first cut metal. And I'm willing to yield a little bit on that. I think I agree with you, especially what if your material is uh, plutonium, right? Nobody's going to start that cut until they are way down the road of design. And of course, that's a real thing that really has happened. Or gold or silver or something, or just, some hardened material that you only have a certain amount of. I could see where you're going to resist cutting metal. I agree. But in the world of aluminum and steel that you can get from McMaster Carr and 3D printers, uh, we can afford to whip something out quickly and just put it in. I think something happens when you put something in your hands that even with the best CAD in the world is different. And I think I've experienced that. I think you've experienced that. And that's kind of where P1 came from, is like, boy, I sure thought about
agreeing
this.
with you. I'm agreeing with you on that point. And that's one of the things where I said, where you have a sketch and then you go model it in SolidWorks, and even just without even printing the model, you can see, oh, we got trouble here. But yes, once you're at that stage, then printing is obviously a good way to say, oh, okay, yeah, looks great, or doesn't, and make changes.
Well, can I get your agreement that P1 has an average lifetime of 15 minutes?
It does depend on let me give you an example. To go way back in history, when I was like 24, and you've probably seen my helicopter parts that I was doing because I was bored doing my apprenticeship. Those parts, I spent hours and hours and hours thinking about how I was going to do those on procedurally, and then the design itself. Um, a totally ridiculous amount of time that under job shop conditions would be out of the question. You already blew the bid. You haven't even
Yeah.
got any material, and you already spent
Right.
more than we're getting paid for. But in a hobby environment, it's a whole different animal. There, I suggest multiple iterations of designing it as completely as possible, and then looking at, okay, and coming back. As long as you're enthused about the project, sometimes making something physical to have in your hand can elevate your enthusiasm. But on the same hand, an abject failure in the beginning and a couple parts that are, just don't work out and whatever, can also kill the project. It doesn't take much to kill a project, as we all know. There's thousands of them that started then died, and I'm part of the group, so I'm not
Yeah.
throwing any stones. I'm just saying that
Evil says something. Evil says something good here. He says, "I think a core thing here is that if your material cost is less than your time spent thinking it through, then you go for P1 quickly."
yes.
Well put, well said. And that's why we're here with a pile of 3D printed parts. Whereas if this was sterling silver, I'd be in a lot of trouble.
But the machining of it itself isn't really the I guess this transposes from when you're at a point where the machining of it, you are not questioning how you're going to do it, and you've had enough experience that I know exactly how this is going to be produced, which most people are. Then it's not so much there's a hobby level where people are in the stages of learning how to machine it and also designing it. And there, I agree with you. Just tear into it, get the experience, But once you get to the point where the machining isn't something you're questioning, yeah, there's things that might be, oh, I haven't done this before. I might need a little, practice or training or whatever on this. But in general, you know what you're doing. Then it's kind of different. The process of actually taking the idea and turning it into material isn't something in question. It's a done deal. You're figuring out what you want to make, and you are capable of making it, as opposed to where you're figuring out what you want to make and you're not sure how you're going to do it. I mean, really not sure. You're a really beginner. So yeah, there's all different stages there, but I'm definitely on the camp of think about it a lot. And the wheels are spinning all the time, just churn, churn, churn. And a lot of times you'll go down a path mentally that was, hundreds of hours of machining, and you back up and say, "Oh, that whole thing sucks. Here's an easier way to do it." And
That's not gonna work. So
yeah,
the story of this ring, right? P2. I said, "Oh, I know what I'll do. I'll put these inserts in, right? These nice heat set inserts, and I'll put them right on the center line. And of course, I'm printing it in this fashion, and I lost track of the symmetries. And then it turns out that no, the two heat insert things are pointing at each other, and the two clear holes are pointing at each other. And I didn't until I pulled this off the printer and I looked at it and actually put the inserts in, because you grab it off the printer, you'll go put the inserts in. They went, "Doop, you bozo."
Yeah, been there, done that.
Yeah. Oh, that's never happened before.
Actually, I never did it, but I've read about it.
I read about it. Yeah, I read about that in the paper. Hey, thank you for making your point, and I think it's well received. You have earned a P1 sticker. As soon as we get them made, we will send you a P1 sticker. Thank you, Robin.
Yeah.
Talk to you later. You can get some finger sandwiches in the back room there. All right, thanks. Excellent. And Robin also has earned a double doink. Let's see. You guys are going crazy in the chat. That's great. I love to see it. Flatlapper said, just did a DRO bracket in aluminum. Subtractive manufacturing decided 3D materials were not up to the task. See? You threw out P1 before you even started. Perfect illustration of what Robin was talking about. So, Josh says, when you're early in your journey, trying and failing is very useful. Learn what not to do. Here's my point. You cannot learn without failure. In electrical engineering, we talk about negative feedback, and a feedback loop only works if there's an error signal. You don't get an error signal if you do everything perfectly. All right, I think we did it. We'll let that hang. If you're watching us on YouTube, a subscription would be in your best interest, because you'll get a notification when the next one starts. And if you're listening on the audio podcast, enjoy. I also listen to many audio podcasts. So we'll see you guys next week. We're going to go put this video out on the wires, and the podcast out on the wires, and then get to work, because we've got a lot to do. Don't forget to get flat and stay flat, and we'll see you soon.